Well, let's get started with our third and last Construction Sandbox workshop. And this has been a lot of fun. So we're going to talk this hour about another area of our BMP toolbox, and this is the good housekeeping and spill prevention measures that we need to employ at the job sites. And so let's take a look, as we've done with the last two workshops, about the two perspectives. So the construction general permits perspective and what it says about good housekeeping. It says, dischargers shall implement good site management or housekeeping measures for construction materials that could potentially be a threat to water quality if discharged. Well, you know, we've been talking about dirt. We understand that dirt is a concern, but construction sites have so many other pollutant sources than dirt. We have pH altering substances like concrete and stucco and plaster and tile work. We have the painters who have their own assortment of sources that are potentially toxic, like paints and solvents and cleansers. And then we have any trade out there has got them. We have the landscapers who have potentially erodible landscape materials, but also nutrients and organics that can go off in that. And then we have things that are common to everybody, like solid waste, trash, the portable sanitary facilities, you know, the porta potties, concrete washout areas. So there's lots and lots of different areas that we need to control at the site, and a lot of the permit does address those. And then, of course, as we've been looking all along at the other perspective, and that'd be the municipal perspective and what the local ordinance is saying. So in this case, this one might say something like this: compliance with best management practices. Every person undertaking any activity or use of a premise which may cause or contribute to stormwater pollution or contamination, illegal discharges, or non-stormwater discharges shall comply with best management practices that are consistent with the CASCA BMP handbooks or equivalent guidelines, which might be like Caltrans. Best management practices means schedules of activities, prohibitions of practices, general good housekeeping practices, pollution prevention and education practices, maintenance procedures, and other management practices found in stormwater pollution prevention plans. And so, again, you know, that's a typical one. Your municipality may have very specific things, like things they don't want to see at all happen, like washing may address that, or where things can be refueled, or where porta potties need to be stored. May say that porta potties cannot be stored in the street. So you may have local ordinances, and it's important to pay attention to those local ordinances to know what's required for your job site. So categories that we're going to talk about today are stockpiles and stockpile management. You've already seen in the Construction Sandbox, we have a couple of them out there. Solid waste, we'll talk about how to manage that. Concrete washout, vehicle maintenance and fueling, material storage, and then finally we'll touch on spill prevention and response. All right, so let's talk about stockpile management and what needs to happen. Now, the permit says that it needs to be contained and bermed. And contained can be open to different interpretations, but the idea is that it's not going to spread out. That's the idea. Number one way that it's done is usually by putting a fiber roll or some other device like a gravel bag or compost sock around the pile. And we already mentioned that does a couple things. It keeps it from the pile from spreading, but it also, if we're using plastic as our cover, it can slow the flow down and help us out with that too. So that's contained or bermed, and then we can put some various covers on here, like plastic would be probably the most widely used. A geotextile, jute mesh, or a fabric a geotextile fabric of some sort. I actually like that because unless we're stockpiling something we do not want to get wet, and that's entirely possible. Maybe because of what we're going to do with that material, we don't want it wet. So that might be a good reason to put plastic on it. But if we don't mind it getting wet, having a fabric that will allow water to pass through it is a really good BMP. And it also, those tend to be a little more durable than the plastic. They're more expensive, yes, but they're a little more durable typically than the plastic, and will slow the flow, allow flow to infiltrate, reduce the runoff from that stockpile. And then you can also put on a hydraulic or straw mulch. Now that's typically done for sites that are or stockpiles that are going to be left there for some time. Maybe it's a long-term storage pile, and so we might want to even hydroseed it so that we get vegetation growing on it, and so it's stabilized. Or we're using a spray-on material because we're spraying other places, so we might as well spray the stockpile as well too, especially if it's not going to be disturbed. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do that to a stockpile that you're actively working. You'd probably want to go with a cover that can be easily removed and put back in place if you're actively using it. But oftentimes, like we just saw a comment in the last class, that now we're going to have this requirement to stockpile topsoil. That would be a very good way to manage your topsoil, because you're going to presumably lose that early in the project or need to remove it early in the project, put it off to where you're going to store it, and then putting a growing media on there might be a great way to maintain that pile. Solid waste management, that is a headache. I tell you, that is a headache, and probably the #1 area of non-compliance. The permit says that waste bins shall be covered at the end of every day and during rain events. So those of you who have been out on job sites, what's the percentage that you see of those bins being covered at the end of every day? Yeah, probably about 0.1%. And maybe that's being generous. Yeah, not many, not many. Now, beware, at least in our region, the regional board tends to go out to job sites after 3 o'clock. And so when they go out during hours, what happens is your waste bin's open. Oh yeah, we'll cover it at the end of the day. Yeah, What happens is lots of times our regional board people go out first at 3, 4 o'clock the previous day, and if things look good, they may not come back. But if things look bad, they'll come back the next day and go, well, that's funny. Here's a picture I took yesterday at 4:30, and it wasn't covered. Yeah, they don't play fair, do they? But yeah, it's rarely done, and there's a good reason. There's a good reason. The reason is it is a headache, and it is a real problem. Because if you just throw a tarp over it during the dry season, not a big deal. During the wet season, it's a real big deal, because what happens, that tarp turns into a swimming pool, right? And then the thing you're trying to prevent happens anyways when you try to remove that swimming pool from your tarp. You're washing your trash with all that water. What also happens is that, yeah, the homeless population really like those tarps. They tend to walk and disappear. So that is a big problem too. More and more bin providers are starting to put lids on that either swing over or slide over. My favorite is the ones that swing over. Here's a product actually you could look up that we liked. It's kind of a do-it-yourself kit. They will sell you the parts. Basically, you see on the right there the 4-way connectors and the 3-way connectors. Basically, you go buy PVC pipe, use those connectors, and you can build a dome, and that you see on the left there. And you put a tarp over that, and you ratchet strap it down. Then 2 people can easily remove it at the beginning of the day, and then put it back up in the middle. But that still doesn't keep the homeless from taking it. All right, Let's go to another big area of problems, and that's concrete washout. This can be a problem. Now, this video, I actually shot this video. The reason why I turned on my camera was what caught my eye is this is first I should explain, it's a self-recycling truck. And by that, what I mean is how it's supposed to work is a good concept anyways. In theory, it's just the practicality doesn't work out so well. But basically, they'll put a bucket at the end of that slide. And the idea is that they'll wash that slide down, the concrete off that slide into the bucket, and the bucket has a hose attached to it, and it'll vacuum it up, pump it back into the rotating drum, and then they take it back to the batch plant and they dump it into that batch plant's wastewater system, which is, permitted and's got the ability to deal with that in a legal way. That works, that's the theory. But in practice, what we've seen is just what you're seeing here at most places where we see it, spray going everywhere. What caught my attention with this one was I saw the guy pick up the bucket and dump it onto the ground. That's when I turned my camera on, unfortunately, right afterwards. And definitely a big no-no. It's against the permit. The permit doesn't allow it. Most municipal codes will not allow it. And it would probably trigger a non-visible pollutant sampling requirement, and probably get the guy spoken to and lectured about it. Now, before we beat up the poor guy, is he really that much of an environmental criminal? Do you see it to the left, what's happening to the left of that? You see that pumper truck? They're pouring hundreds of yards of wet cement right there onto the same ground. Which one is presenting more of a pH issue? Yeah, that's where usually we enter our phrase that we say around here, common sense and regulations often have nothing in common. Yeah, if the water board catches you doing that, or you as a municipal inspector see somebody, you're obligated to stop them and go, nope, sorry, use the washout. This isn't working for you. And to be honest, I've seen this happening even on paved environments, and I've gone down and sampled the water going into a storm drain down from this activity, and the pH was like 11. And it is a concern. Yeah, use your concrete washout. Use those places where it's appropriate to do that. Also, maintaining vehicles and fueling. You need to have, the permit says it needs to be in a place that's been fitted with appropriate BMPs, and usually that means containment in case you have a spill. There's devices you can buy like this one with collapsible sides that you can drive onto it and do your fueling or store your equipment there, or your fueling supplies in that containment. Material storage. You'll see in our yard that we have a storage bin, but keeping those materials that could be mobilized by stormwater. Basically anything that's not meant to be stored outdoors needs to be stored inside in a rainproof covering. And if it's liquid, it needs to be contained. Speaking of liquids, spill prevention is a big component of having a compliant SWIP. So the construction general permit says that you are to develop a spill response and implementation element of the SWIP prior to the commencement of construction activities. And that's going to address two things. One is, what equipment and materials do you have available to clean up a spill? So a construction project has got to have a spill kit that's appropriate to the potential they have on site. And the second part is training. Now, this training happens just about as often as people cover trash bins. Not very often. And it's super critical to train people. When we're outside, I'm going to be giving you a training that I hope you take and use with your crews. So make sure you have your spill kits available, and we'll be going outside. So Mike, are you around? Mike joined us? Uh-oh. Let's see. Did we let him in, Rebecca?
Yeah, he's in.
Okay. And Danny.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Mike. And let me
Okay,
find
good.
Danny.
Good.
All right.
You got Danny yet?
Yes, we do. He's got to just turn his camera around.
Okay, sounds
There you go.
good.
All right, good. You guys are good.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about concrete washout. And like John says in some of the videos that we have taken and that we have seen, concrete truck drivers basically are just doing what they've been doing for years. And so most of this is about education. You have this kind of a bin that is usually on industrial or commercial sites where they're pouring, you know, a little bit more volume than maybe the track home would be. But I have yet to see a concrete truck back up on here and wash this off without some slurry kind of going outside of this area, even though this is probably one of the better controlled environments to be able to do washout. The plus about this is that when they back this up, this service comes with a company that comes out and dewaters and hauls this off and brings you a new bin. So that's a real plus for this kind of a situation. Mostly we see on small residential jobs, it'll be a kiddie pool that they'll use and wash out. And just like John said, they have the ability to capture in a bucket on the bottom of the chute. They are supposed to wash it down, capture it in a bucket, and they have a vacuum system that puts it right back into the tank. That's rare. Usually we see so much hosing down because they're trying to get all the concrete off their truck and make it look as clean as it can be, because dried concrete, of course, makes a mess. So I'm going to show you another thing that we stumbled across, and it's a pretty basic. They make a larger size, a larger volume, but it's a cardboard containment, and it's got some plastic in it that kind of works similar to a kiddie pool. We have seen the straw bales surrounded the perimeter, made a little perimeter out of, and put the plastic in. We really don't care for that kind of a thing so much because it typically gets damaged. When the truck driver backs up too far, he can't really tell, you know, that his truck is against the hay bales, and sometimes moves them. The plastic can get brittle or torn or damaged with the chute in it. And so that's always kind of a problem. So just be aware that this is about education. We typically take, and I go up to a concrete driver all the time and I talk to them about, I know that you're doing the best that you can, but this is just not working. And so a hot button a few years ago became elevated pH, maybe not a hot button, but at least I became aware of the fact that pH in groundwater was being looked at a lot more thorough. So this is the culprit for pH. One of the culprits for pH. When you get on a construction site, another culprit for pH is our plasters, our stucco, our finishers. They seem to create quite the mess. And so what do you think about those stucco guys?
Yeah, you know, it's funny how little in the stormwater world is talked to about the stucco folks. Because if you think about it, stucco people have just about every pollutant we're concerned about. pH altering. Well, the stucco has all those mortars in it.
Sure.
So you have that. Turbidity. A lot of turbidity, sands and grit coming off of that. Their stockpiles that they're using. So they got stockpile management issues, and then non-stormwater discharges.
Right.
High pH non-stormwater discharge,
right.
You know, from curing the stucco. They have that. Then they have solid waste. They're filthy. They got trash everywhere.
Plastic, all kinds
and
of
so,
stuff.
You know, I'm always amazed at how little outreach is given to the stucco people about that. And so that's important why QSPs need, and QSDs who are riding the SWIPs need to understand what trades are there, what pollutants they have associated with them. And stucco people basically just about everything except paint.
It's true. And probably most of us would say the same thing. When I go out to a site that has track homes, you may see 3 feet of plastic around the perimeter before they start. You know, they can be in a 2-story house. It can be falling and splattering everywhere. I've stopped them on several occasions and brought them together and tried to explain, why this is unacceptable, get the general contractor to, address that. But it's a real difficult place, and you're right, not much conversations goes to those folks, but they actually do make cleanouts for stucco and painters and those kind of things.
And they have pads now that you can lay down to basically absorb that water that they're using for curing, and that way it's not flowing offside or flowing to the curb and gutter.
Limit the pH.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you can just let them dry out or throw them away. But yeah, got to pay attention to each trade and what pollutants they have associated with them.
Right. Okay. Now we're going to walk over here to secondary containment. So secondary containment is kind of a big issue. I see most of the times on the jobs that I'm on, the secondary containment. Here's a great little tool that we came across that we bought. And this is great in the dry season to put something like this. You can stake these in. Except here where the ground is so hard, but typically you can stake it in. This isn't the best scenario, especially if there was a rain coming. This particular product does come with a cover that we could put on so that it wouldn't be exposed to rainwater. This open bag really isn't the greatest idea to have in there because wind erosion would get to it. But secondary containment is a big thing on jobs. I see a lot of gasoline cans that air compressors, they use to refuel, and they're not in secondary containment. I usually am talking to them about put it in your truck, put it in the garage, just get it, off of the dirt. So secondary containment is a big thing. Portable toilets, secondary containment, I see probably 50%, maybe more, maybe 60% now that have a secondary containment in the portable toilet. And we all know that typically what's caught in those containments isn't necessarily from the portable toilet unless there's a leak in it. And if there's a leak, you got a bigger problem than that. It'll either be rainwater that's caught into it, or it'll be the water that the fellow uses when he is doing the cleaning process. But it's still required that you don't want, I think one of the statements is no closer than 50 feet to a storm drain, and on soil would be the best place to have it. I see them in the streets all the time. On sidewalks.
And most municipalities would not allow them in the streets. They
Right.
need to be kept out of the streets, out of the curb and gutter, or even off the sidewalks. They need to be actually up on a private lot or one of the lots that are being developed. So we were talking earlier about construction general permit requirements,
Right.
and then municipal permits, municipal code requirements. And they're two different things lots of times.
A lot of times.
So
yes.
the municipality, you got to pay attention. What are they expecting? They might want it well away from the street. And by the way, the construction general permit doesn't say anything about being 50 feet from a DI.
Right.
It's the CASCA and the Caltrans cut sheets that specify that. So if you're using one of those in your SWIP, guess what? That's your new requirement. Right.
And I've been on sites where after an inspection, I'll find the general contractor, I'll speak to him about whatever. And he is completely unaware that that portable toilet was on the soil and now it's got moved. It was in somebody's way. They picked it up, they moved it all over. So there's always something, but like I say, it's about education. And when we go on job sites, the construction general permit is definitely in our pocket, and we're looking at what's called out on the SWIP and the SWIP map. And I don't typically go out as the stormwater cop. I kind of go out as an educator. Like, okay, you're doing this and that. That's not effective. That shouldn't be there. And so let's tidy that up or clean that up. And most contractors are willing to work with you.
The real issue with portable toilets is keeping them from tipping over.
Truly.
You had a job site where there were some shenanigans going on.
Yes, we had a job site where every weekend some children would come through and just because of mischief would knock all the portable toilets over. And so contractor would show back up on Monday morning, had a huge mess on his hands. The portable toilet company had to come out and do some cleanup, and then there's all kinds of issues. So I said to him, well, why don't you start staking them down? Just put a rope over it, a couple of stakes in the ground. And that's basically what Caltrans requires, is some kind of strapping to where it's mounted to the ground so that it can't be knocked over. High winds will knock them over. I've seen a backhoe spin around and knock them over. Yeah. So there's different circumstances that can knock them over. But if you stake them, it's the best that you can do. There can always be some vandalism where something's going to happen, but That's kind of about the
Okay.
best you
And
can
we were
do.
talking about trash management earlier. Now, we don't have a trash bin out here. We actually store our trash where?
We store it in the trailer. We have a small 6-foot trailer, 8-foot trailer
BMP
there,
trailer over
BMP
there.
trailer, and we store our trash in there. We know from experience that you've been out on a site where there's a waste bin and the rain is pouring down and you're standing watching water just flow out of it because they all leak. And just like John has talked about earlier, if they do get a tarp over it and then we have a torrential downpour, then they've got a nice swimming pool. And when they try to remove that swimming pool, a lot of times all they're doing is dumping that, you know, five or 600 gallons of water in the bin, and it's going to pour out. I've seen them where the trash bin is right on top of a storm drain. So like I say, it's education. We usually say, okay, move that thing out of the way, get it on dirt, you know, get it covered, especially if a rain event's coming. We've seen covers, maybe 1% of the time I've seen covers on a job site. So where they have a metal cover that rolls
Right.
over the top of them. We have seen some unique things
Yeah.
before, different ways to put kits on there to where you can arch them. Typically, they're not covered. So just be aware that if it rains and all that debris is in there, you know, then water's going through it and it's coming out on the ground, which starts something else. What happens when all that starts to hit the ground?
Well, now you got pollutants running to the storm drain, and that's going to trigger your non-visible pollutant sampling requirement.
Right, which is a whole nother kettle of fish. Sampling, you have to grab a sample, you know, at a down gradient from where the pollution has hit the ground, and then in another location that's not around it, and you have to send it to a lab, and you know that's all very expensive to have that
Yeah.
done.
Now let's talk a little bit about vehicle maintenance and fueling. The permit says that you need to do it in an area that's been fitted with appropriate BMPs. What might that include?
Well, typically we'll see either fiber roll. I'll see fiber roll wrapped in plastic in a place where a truck can drive up on there.
Creates kind of like a berm.
Creates a berm and does a nice job. The thing about a SWIP is a fluid document, and so that BMP location can move. We just have to know about it and note it as a QSP. But to not have any kind of containment is just you're just looking for trouble, because it can be hydraulic fluid breaking out of a piece of equipment. It can be diesel fuel, antifreeze, gasoline. It can be all kinds of things. So to have some kind of a designated area for sure for fueling, and then to talk to the contractor about, make sure that your maintenance guy that comes on site to maintain these equipment has a spill kit on site, has a spill kit in his truck, or can get to a spill kit in case something that he's doing hits the ground.
All right, right. Okay, and I think one last area right here is our stockpiles. We have a couple that you can see here. We've
Sure.
talked about some of these, but walk us through some proper stockpile management.
Well, one of the things that you want to do with stockpiles is, of course, you have to start to think about if rains are coming or if there's high winds, you know, how do I manage this? And most of the time we don't see stockpiles covered. And when we do see them covered, they may be covered in plastic with the rock bag thrown on top. And that's about the extent of it. What we've done here is we've covered it in plastic to show you what they look like if they're covered with plastic. We've put some filtration devices down around their compost socks around there so that it slows the flow. We put rock bags on there so that it slows the flow, because if we had around this stockpile fines, like John has said in the past, we would just be creating a massive water slide. And so you want to have this kind of a setup, but you also want to pay attention to this plastic. Is just like we talked before in the class before, this plastic is in great shape now, and we come here in a week later and this plastic can be completely dissolved and destroyed and all over the place. Right. So you can't just take for granted that I've covered my stockpile and that's good to go and I'll address it whenever it becomes a problem again.
Right here we got some mulch. It's not covered, but if they're actively using that,
sure,
then that's okay. But we used to write in our permit or in our SWIPs 14 days.
14
so you got
days.
14 days, just like the soil. And if it's left alone for 14 days or more, that's when you have to cover it. But the water board corrected us. What did they say?
The water board said, I'm sorry, if you've got a stockpile, it needs to be covered. And there's no 14 days. The 14 days doesn't exist. If you've got an inactive stockpile, it has to be covered. And so we were retrained. We were thinking, oh goodness, we've been quoting this 14-day thing. and we were told opposite. So now we talk to them about if that's an inactive stockpile. Of course, I've had the contractor say, you know, I run my tractor into it every day, so it's active. And I'm like, well, let's go on the backside of your stockpile and see the 3 feet of weeds growing in here. My guess is this is an active stockpile. So they try to get away with what they can get away with, and we're there to help them. You know, John says it all the time. We're an umpire. We call balls and strikes. Whether that contractor or whoever is in control of that project does these things or doesn't do these things, we don't have any real permission to go and shut them down. We just need to call it like it is and get it on our inspection form, what's happening and what they're doing, so that our license isn't brought into a microscope and said, hey, you guys haven't been talking about anything, and now they've got all kinds of concerns.
Yeah,
and
and we
issues.
try to educate too.
Educate,
Say,
sure.
hey, if storm's coming in, it might be really good to cover that stockpile.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about spill prevention. We got a little
Okay.
drill here we're gonna walk them through. So let's go on over here to our containment.
So this would be normally sometime we'd have big having a conversation with people that we'd be walking with, but now it's just John and I.
Yeah, so we'll see how this goes.
So we're going to be as entertaining as we can. We're just not sure how this is going to work out, but this will be something for you to see, and hopefully, and this is one thing that John always says, hopefully this is a takeaway that you will see and you will use, because this kick the bucket drill is what John calls it. This kick the bucket drill is really educational. It was educational for us when we first started it, because we were thinking that we kind of had it all dialed in and all together, but that necessarily wasn't the case.
So it's a way to simulate a spill without having a spill, and see how prepared your crew is to respond to a spill. So we usually give them a scenario like this. You know, the pipe fitters were in here and it's lunchtime and they're thinking in and out.
Without a doubt.
And they're rushing in and out the gate, and they forget that on their tailgate is down and there's a bucket of cutting oil sitting there. So it falls off right here. And you walked out also thinking about in and out. And you come out here and you see this.
And now I'm panicked. What am I going to do about this? What am I going to do about this? The first thing I'm thinking is the spill. Where's the spill kit? Let me find the spill kit. Okay, so I'm going to go and grab the spill kit real quick. Because I'm panicked, I see this oil going all over the place. And oh, by the way, guess where this oil's heading? It's heading to a storm drain. So now what do? I start to get things in there that maybe absorb. Of course, these are kind of oil booms, so they don't help with water too much, but you'll get the general idea. But as John mentions, what is the thing that you really should do first? Even though grabbing the spill kit's great, send somebody after the spill kit. But now it's lunchtime. So what's happening typically at lunch?
Everybody's driving in and out. They're going out the same gate.
So now what do we do?
If we got traffic going through here, that's a problem. It's going to go out onto that frontage road. And so probably what we want to do, set up a zone. So one thing we can do is position someone here, and until we can get
Danny, mic got muted.
So basically, we had one of our guys that was here. He saw the drain.
Can you hear it? Okay, so basically what happened is one of our participants said, well, just throw your body in front of the storm drain. And we're like, throw your body in front of the storm drain? Oh yeah, he says, anything to stop that spill from going into the storm drain. So that gave us a good laugh. But ultimately, so exactly what John says, this is what you want to do. You want to stop traffic from making a bigger mess. Okay, and then maybe what's some of the next things you want to do?
So yeah, and let's back up a little bit. Why we do this is, you know, when we're saying, okay, what do we do first? And somebody will go, we get the spill kit.
Yeah.
And we're like, right answer. Where is it?
And most people say, I don't know.
If you get the deer, you know, the deer in the headlights look from everybody, you know, you got to do a little more training. And so that could be a real valuable lesson. Do people know where the spill kit is at? Do they know where to find it? And so that's why we do this kick the bucket drill, that hopefully, and make them actually go get it and bring it out here. Now you don't have to use it, but you're walking them through the process. And then the other thing that we want to do is then talk about the different things we got to do with this process. Like, who do we call? Do we need to notify someone?
Who would you contact first? More than likely, you would contact the supervisor on the job, and you would say, hey, we've got a spill out here, and we're working on containment, but you need to look in the SWIP, which has all the information about who you need to contact, and maybe reach out to possible organizations.
Yeah, yeah. And then we talk them through the various action items we need to take after this. So we've called internally, we've notified internally, we've looked at what the SWIP says, which agencies need to be notified. We've contacted the Office of Emergency Services, the County Environmental Health, and maybe the Water Board, let them know. Now, we'll also walk through when to report, when you don't need to report. If any oil goes into a storm drain, you're reporting. You're reporting. Yeah, it doesn't matter how much. But if it's on the ground and stays there, doesn't get to a storm drain, then it's 1 barrel of oil, which is 42 gallons.
42 gallons.
And so then we'll walk them through, okay, what's next? Oh, well, we got to get our used absorbent, and we got to pick that up. We got to do something with that. And so we have them walk through, how do we do that? Do we go throw it in the trash? No, wrong answer. We don't do that. We got to make it's hazardous waste. And we talk about how to contain that, how to containerize it, how to label it. And then we walk through, all right, we're done picking up the used absorbent. Now what? If it's going to rain tomorrow, do we have any concerns?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, we got possible sheen. And so we may have some cleanup to do. And we walk through, what does that entail? How does that work? So I hope you take this exercise away and use that in your location with your crews. I think it'll be really eye-opening, maybe as you as a trainer, because you realize, I'm glad I did this training.
Yeah.
And then they'll go, oh, I never knew that that's what we had to do. So
yeah,
really
absolutely true.
good thing. I'm gonna go
Okay,
inside.
all right. And so in this situation, you can look at this drain, and this drain, oh, by the way, goes to a creek that's just at the back of our property. So if anything went into this storm drain, then you would definitely have to contact OES. You'd have to, and they will probably initiate whoever else to call, but we would have to basically clean this drain, maybe put some booms down in this creek if there's water flowing through it. If it's the dry season, maybe we don't have to put booms out, but there's organizations that we would call and contact, and they would initiate a lot of things. When we say the next rain comes up, we would see a sheen. So what are we going to do about that? We've got to be able to capture that sheen. So we're going to put some absorbents down. We're going to remove them. We're going to maybe vacuum them up. Most of these spill kits, if you get them, they come in a 5-gallon bucket. It's got absorbent in it, and it's got a label on it for you to put back in that bucket to be able to, haul off as hazardous waste. So,
All right, Mike, I'm back in. So thank you very much.
Okay, we'll turn it over to John. Thanks.
All right, great. Thank you, everybody, for being patient there. I think Mike's Bluetooth died while he was out there, but good. All right, let me bring our presentation back up, and we'll bring this to a close here real soon. So thank you. And also make sure that you put in questions or comments into the chat. I do want to hear from you. We'll have some time to do that here, so go ahead and put that in. All right, and let me just pull a couple screens up here so I can see what's going on. Great. Okay, so let's look at some real life situations here to just kind of wrap up our afternoon of going through the BMPs. And here's a real life situation. And this is basically off a really giant compressor that was being used for pile driving. And here at the connections, there is a lot of oil spill happening right in here. You see it on the ground here, you see it around here, see it at the forefront of the picture. You see some used absorbent, some of those diapers I was laying out outside there. 5-gallon bucket with some oil on here and 5 gallons here. You can even see that oil has splattered all around. Not a great situation, especially when you realize that this was right next to a river. In fact, it was part of a roadway demolition project happening right next to a river. And not a great situation. So this is where we need that containment. We absolutely need containment. We need to have something like what we showed you earlier, that pop-up containment where you can lay down the sides and drive in and then put your sides back up. Definitely a situation for that. In fact, you even see a gas can here. This is just a disaster waiting to happen, especially when you consider that it's right next to a river that's a pretty pristine river. And it was, I took this picture actually before that big storm event that came through a week or two ago. So yeah, this is all the more reason why you need to pay attention to these good housekeeping measures. Here's another situation, a staging area that definitely is not employing good housekeeping. Here we see broken bags, open bags of various materials here. This looks like cementatious material right here. The track out here not contained, capable of being blown by the wind or washed out by water. Not a good situation. And what I've come to notice, and I know I've spoken enough with the water board inspectors to know what they think. If they drive by a site and the staging area looks like this from the outside, that is almost an automatic invite for them to stop and give that site more attention. Where if they're in a hurry or they're having to prioritize their inspections and they drive by a site and everything looks neat and in order, that's going to be less of an invite for them to stop at that site. So there are certain things that wave a red flag for inspector, whether it's a water board or municipal inspector, and that would be good housekeeping. It would be stockpiles because they stick up like sore thumbs that aren't protected, and it would be track out. So if you pay attention to those three, you may lessen your likelihood of being inspected. And here's another site that we had where they were doing drywalling inside, and the drywallers were placing all of their scraps and dust into these cardboard boxes right here. And then that night we got this rain event. So this would be a non-visible pollutant trigger because of not handling solid waste correctly. And that would be a non-compliance issue for sure with the permit. So good, I think that's it. So let me go back here. Let's see if we have any questions. Good, and thank you for your patience. I think we nearly pulled it off today, so we're glad that you've been with us today. So if a stockpile's been slightly vegetated, not 100% density, does it still need to be covered? Remember, we go back to that phrase, effective soil cover. So it's really up to the discretion and the professional judgment of the professional in charge. So that'd be the QSP. If the QSP looks at that and believes that with the vegetation that it has, that it is sufficient cover, then that's fine. If the QSP in their best professional judgment believes, no, it's not an effective soil cover, that more needs to be done, then they may need to cover it or do something more to get that vegetation to grow in. So yeah, here's a comment, 2022 CGP attachment D says store chemicals in watertight containers with secondary containment to prevent any spillage or leakage, or store in a completely enclosed storage area. And yes. And that's actually not too different from the 2009. So yeah, that's already pretty much a requirement. Maybe the watertight container's a new phrase in this, but the idea is keep it out of the rain, keep it in secondary containment. Now, keeping chemicals or drums in a Connex box, or like we showed you out there, is that enough? Is that secondary containment? Well, those boxes can leak. It still would be best to put it on a spill containment pallet. That would be more ideal. But at least you're going in the right direction by putting it inside. And also a comment here, keep debris or trash in waste containers if it is subject to transport from the site by wind or runoff. Yes, they did soften the language slightly in the permit, so I'm grateful to that. But it still says cover waste disposal containers at the end of every business day and during precipitation events. And okay, one more here, and go ahead if you have others. We still have a few moments, but type in your questions. Does ground area used for mixing stucco need to be covered with sheeting? That is a really good idea, and I think would be a best management practice to do that, is to cover it with sheeting, because the whole point is we don't want the pH altering substances to go into the ground and potentially alter stormwater, or go into the shallow soils and act as a source of pH problems for stormwater after the project. So where you can, especially where you're curing and having that kind of runoff, that would be a great BMP to lay down the plastic, especially if it's warmer weather like today. Letting it evaporate rather than letting it soak into the ground is a good BMP. Any other questions, comments before we end this workshop? Go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like. We could take other comments, questions. And let's see if we got any more come in. All right. And yes, can you email me if you have a question? Yes. See, is it on the next slide? No, I don't have my email address here. So what you can do is just go to stormwater awareness .org, the website where you signed up for this, and just communicate to us through our contact us email, and so we can do that. In fact, Rebecca, type my email into the chat if you would. All right. Do you have any additional advice on dealing with unauthorized dumping? That is a huge, huge problem, Burton. Very much a problem, especially around Caltrans projects with anywhere these days with the degree of homelessness that we're having to deal with. Of course, it's not just the homeless that do unauthorized dumping. Others do too. I live out in the country and am often the victim of illegal dumping. Yeah, that's a huge problem. One of the things you can do is try to keep a secured site as best as possible. Having good perimeter controls might help, but it's pretty tough to keep it happening at all, especially if you got homeless living near you. So not a lot we can do. If you're on a Caltrans job, what we've been instructed on jobs we've been on is where we got some real problems is notify Highway Patrol, and they can help. I would just notify the local authorities if you have unauthorized dumping happening, especially regularly. Try to work with your local authorities, especially municipalities. If you're within an MS4, work with them. And of course, if you're on a Caltrans job, then go to your RE and get, I'm sure, they will be able to help address that situation. All right, you guys have been great. Thank you for your patience today. And we still have Stormwater Awareness Week workshops coming your way. So take advantage of those. We got one more day of workshops. Tomorrow morning is a workshop that I'm really looking forward to. It's my good friend, David Franklin. He's actually someone who trained me years and years ago. And a good friend of mine, a great colleague, and he's got a great sense of humor, very dry humor, but he will usually keep his workshop full of stuff that'll keep you chuckling for a month or so. But he's doing a workshop on in-water work, a topic that I rarely see addressed in stormwater workshop. So I'm really excited about that one. So that'd be a good one to check out tomorrow. And there's some other real good opportunities. And then if you're in the municipal field, that the very last workshop is, I think, going to be one of the most fun ones. And that's with Kathy Grant, who's going to be talking about education they do with kids, and in particular about salmon. And she's actually going to take the camera into the field and show you some of the classrooms and maybe some of the salmon that they're working with, and how they use that to teach the kids. So, all right, thank you, everyone. We'll see you at one of the next workshops.